محمد يا رسول الله محمد يا حبيب الله محمد يا رسول الله محمد
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers of Imam Al-Hussein TV. First and foremost, I wish you Mawlud al-Nabi Mubarak. As well as that, I wish you the auspicious birth of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq Mubarak. To start off with today's program of Milad al-Nabi, we'll be discussing the topic of Rasulullah's first 6 years with none other than our special guest, Sheikh Mohammed Al-Hilli. Salamun alaikum, Sheikh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, a warm salam to all the sisters and brothers, all the mu'mineen and mu'minat around the world watching, and a warm congratulations on these wonderful auspicious days of Wilada, the Wilada of Sadiqeen, the Holy Prophet Rasul al-A'zam wa Nabi al-Akram Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and of course Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi afdal salatu wa salam. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He grants us all the continuous tawfiq to follow in the footsteps of these great individuals, to be able to visit their graves and to be able to celebrate one day, inshallah, in Madinatul Munawwara, under the dome of the Prophet and the domes of Imams of Jannatul Baqi', inshallah.
It'd be an honor. And inshallah, we can do this together in a few years.
Ilahi Ameen. Inshallah.
So to start off with, Sheikh, I wanted to ask, why do we look at the first 6 years? Obviously, Nabuwat started after 40 years. So what would you say is the significance of these first 6 years?
Yes, I think the reason why it would be very important to discuss the early years of the life of the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, is because it's not often discussed in detail. And at the same time, it really illustrates a number of critical points which, of course, really shaped the personality of the greatest and the choicest of God's creation. And the Quran addresses it. We have a number of ahadith related to it, but it's often not discussed in as much detail, simply because, of course, childhood of these great individuals is often somehow not focused as significant or considered as important as, for example, their youthful age, or even more their adult life.
Fair enough.
So the childhood years of every single ma'soom needs to be looked at as much as we possibly can. We need to examine the circumstances by which, for example, they were raised, the incidents that happened. The life of the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, is the most studied biography without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, people who are non-Muslims look at the seerah of Rasulullah, isn't it? But the key thing here is that the seerah has been the subject to much distortion. There's been a concerted effort to introduce things, fabricate things, and sometimes we hear things from the minbar and we assume that it's a foregone conclusion. I'll give you an example. How many of us have come to know about Uhud, that there was a trap for the Prophet, he fell and he broke his teeth. Isn't it? Most of us have heard this. We think it's a normal incident that actually happened. I found a reliable narration from Imam Al-Baqir alayhi salam, which somebody says to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I went to the place of Uhud and I saw this place where the Prophet broke his teeth. Imam alayhi salam looked at him and said, this is a lie. The Prophet never broke his teeth. Yes, innaha khadsha. Khadsha in Arabic means it was just a small kind of bruise. Yes, there was nothing that involved the Prophet's teeth being broken. So what happened? Yes, in order to either weaken the position of the Prophet or one of the Ahl al-Bayt, some stories were introduced, and we'll see the first 6 years of the life of the Prophet. The reason why I've chosen the first 6 years is because these are the years that he was primarily under the care of Halima Sa'diyah and of course Amina, his blessed mother. peace and blessings be upon them all. Then he moves towards the care of his grandfather Abdul Muttalib, then Abu Talib salamullahi alayhim ajma'in. So the first 6 years is very, very interesting.
Sure. And you know, you mentioned Lady Halima. Why would Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam need a witness at this point? You know, obviously he is the Nabi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His mother has just given birth to him. Would she not want to spend time with him?
Of course, it's a very interesting question. People sometimes look at something in history and want to project it to how it is today.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that it's fine to a certain extent, but we've got to remember that history is history and things are different 1400 years ago than they are today. Of course, it's considered to be a possibility that in Mecca, due to the relative pollution, they say the air of Mecca, you would have, in terms of the tribes coming in, you would have different kinds of people coming in. So the air wasn't as pure. So we're told one of the reasons why people would ask their sons or daughters to go to the outside or the outskirts with a witness was because of a pure air. Another one is the dialect. The language that was spoken in Mecca was somehow affected by the dialects of the caravans that would come from different parts and would speak their own dialect. So it is said that the children would want to be raised in an environment where the pure Arabic dialect, which is of the villages of those around the main cities, would actually speak. Another reason why we're told that this was something that was considered was that it was a habit, that it was something that people would do. It became a trend.
Sure.
That, you know what, it's a newborn baby, let's send him or her outside the city. Now, one thing though that hasn't been looked at is that all these are given as reasons why children are taken outside the city in order to be looked after by a witness. But there is a reason often not discussed. And that's the hidden reason that is divinely orchestrated, right? Divinely orchestrated for this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has plans. Allah is what? Al-Raziq, Al-Mubin. He is the sustainer. We are told that around Mecca there was famine. And there were villagers who were suffering with poverty. They wanted help. They were desperate. They didn't know what to do. Right? Either there was maybe a drought or simply they were not able to gain what they needed. So, in order to grant them rizq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to them through the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So the very presence of Rasulullah outside Mecca, according to narrations, rain began to fall. People began to see barakah. People began to see rizq emerging. Now they at that time would not necessarily put two and two together.
Yeah, of course.
But there are clearly hidden reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a plan for the Messenger of God. He wanted a plan to be orchestrated. He wanted the Prophet to be outside Mecca for these people to be nourished. It's very interesting in our lives, just so that we kind of have correlation for this. In our lives, sometimes we see certain things happening, we get angry or we're frustrated or somehow unhappy about certain things in our lives happening, but there is an outcome that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planned that is part of something that we don't see. A simple example for those who follow football or soccer, you know, if you remember, there was a game a few seasons ago. I don't like to mention a Manchester United player, but what can I do? Ronaldo scored a goal that was a very clear goal, but it was ruled out. Sure. And so he was a captain of the team. I think it was Juventus, or perhaps he was playing for Spain. I can't remember. I think it was a Spain game actually.
Portugal,
so he took, Portugal, sorry. Portugal, of course. So he took his captain, Portugal. He took this captain armband out and threw it, angry. You remember that? So as a result, somebody who was working there picked it up and then auctioned it. And when he auctioned it, he got like something like, I don't know, 70,000 euros.
Wow, okay.
And he gave all the money to a girl who needed the money for an urgent medical operation.
Subhanallah.
Allah wanted that girl to be saved. And it happened through the armband of this particular player.
Wow.
So in this particular example, and in so many examples, we think, he was angry, he was not happy. But there are asbab, there are causations that take place.
Subhanallah, beautiful connection. You know, now that we've established the point as to, number one, why he went out of Mecca in the first place, and number two, why he had wet nurses, I think we should ask who were his witnesses firstly,
Yes.
and how many of them did he have?
Yes, it's a very important question. People today might wonder, did he have more than one witness? Because most of us have heard about Halima Sa'diyya radwanullahi ta'ala alayha. We know of her grave in Jannatul Baqi'. By the way, there are many graves in Jannatul Baqi' that are hidden. But Halima, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted her grave to still be around, and people who know where the grave is through the maps are able to go and pay respects to her grave. But there is a question, and that is, you hear this story that the Prophet ﷺ with Hamza, they're kind of brothers from the suckling of the milk, because they had the same wetness. You hear that story sometimes being associated. And it is said that, of course, when did the Prophet go with wetness? Some narrations say 2 days, 3 days, 9 days after he was born. Amina salamullahi alayha would be nursing him during that time. Then he went off, according to riwayat, with Halima. But some say there is a lady whom is considered to be by people as what? As the wet nurse. What's her name? We are told that her name is Thawbiyya Mawla Abi Lahab. Now Thawbiyya, she was a servant of Abu Lahab. Okay. They say that she fed the Prophet. Okay. And they narrate narrations like the Prophet wanted to free her because she was a slave of Abu Lahab, but he refused. There are narrations that he would send her gifts. There are narrations that after Khaybar, he heard that she died. He asks, does she have any children? They say no, she doesn't have any children. They say, the Prophet says, does she have any family? They say no. There is a problem though with these narrations. Sure. It is what? Further investigation, what does it show? It shows that the link between her and the Prophet is through this claim that Hamza was the individual who also suckled from her. They say Hamza and the Prophet were both suckling from her because she had a son by the name of Masruh. Okay. And as a result of this Masruh, the Prophet and Hamza would suckle from her. There's a problem here. Hamza was 2 years older than Masruh. Masruh was what? Was not somebody, or Masruh, some narrations say, was 2 years older than Hamza. Irrespective, what we find is it's not possible for her to have had the milk 2 years after.
Yeah, sure.
So, where does this story come from? This story is fabricated by Bani Umayyah in order to highlight the status of Abu Lahab and to reduce the status of Abu Talib. See so much effort being placed in order to tarnish the reputation of Abu Talib. There's nothing to do with Abu Talib in this instance. But they wanted to say, look, the Prophet had somebody who was a servant of Abu Lahab, and he was suckling from her as a witness. Therefore, it is not likely that he had any other witness other than Halima As-Sa'diyya radwanullahi ta'ala alayha. And of course, Halima had a very special position in the heart of the Prophet, because we are told that when later in the year 8 after Hijrah, after the battle of Hunayn, we find that the daughter of Halima comes to see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when she comes to see the Prophet stands up for her, respects her, really honors her, gives her gifts, okay? Because he would call Halima my mother, right? And later when they needed help, the Prophet would look after them as well. What's interesting though, is that we do not find sufficient evidence that the Prophet had any other witnesses other than Halima As-Sa'diyya.
Okay, fine, fair enough. So now that we've established, so two things. First and foremost, that the Prophet went out and the reason that he went out. Secondly, the purpose of witnesses, and linked to that, baby Halima was his witness. Now, going from there, are there any fabrications about Lady Halima and her time with the Prophet?
Yes, I mean, I think sometimes when we sit and listen or read literature, when we read the story and the life of the Holy Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sometimes we take things for granted, or we sometimes wonder about some stories that we come across. One of the main distortions that took place regarding the first 6 years of the life of the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam is related to Halima.
Okay.
And that is in which way? You know, sometimes you hear in the minbar or even people talking about that she came to Mecca looking for someone, right? And she looked and looked. She didn't want to take the Prophet because he's an orphan. His dad, his father has passed away before he was born. So until there was no one left. Then I see narrations that say that, you know, the family Bani Hashim were poor. So they couldn't feed, they couldn't give her enough money. And so she said, very well, I'll just take him. That is the narrative that's given about the first few days of the life of the greatest human being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. But there is a number of problems with this story, and it is one that we reject categorically. Why? Why do we reject the story of Halima coming, not wanting to take the Prophet, then what? Somehow she's convinced to take the Prophet. The story is completely different. Right? What is the story? The story is that Abdul Muttalib Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhi, the grandfather of Rasulullah, was waiting for Halima. It is a plan of the Almighty. There is a divine plan for this lady to feed the Prophet of Islam and to take him. In fact, the narrations tell us that he would sit, Abdul Muttalib Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhi, would sit in the mountainous region, the area around the Kaaba, وهو جالس على كرسي. He would just solve the problems of the people, right? And he was looking for this individual. So when Halima looked at him, said, I want to arda, I want to suckle. فقال لها, if he accepts you very well. If he accepts you very well. So go to Amina. So she goes to Amina, the mother of the Holy Prophet, right? So she says to her, my name is Halima, and I have come to, feed your son. Look at the answer of Amina salamullahi alayha. This is the key. Yes, she says, "Na'am, anti man umirtu an usallima waladi ilayha." You are the one whom I have been commanded to give my son to.
Wow, subhanallah.
I am the, yes, I've been waiting for you. You're the one. Come. Yes.
Yeah.
Amina is looking for Halima, not Halima is looking. The narrations tell us that there is a plan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted. So then Amina was asked by Halima, at night, do you need light, to see? She said no. فقالت منذ ولادته لم أحتج إلى مصباح. Since he was born, I don't need any light to illuminate. Yes. فأخذت النبي وكان نائما. So Halima takes the Prophet and he was asleep. ثم جلس وضحك. He woke up, then he smiled towards the face of Halima. وتبسم. Then he laughed first, then he smiled. Then she said to them, this is the key here. She said, I don't want anything. I don't want you to give me anything. Look at this narrative compared to the other one. The other one said they didn't have enough money. She said, very well, I'll take whatever you can give me. Right? Sure. Here, she says, no, I don't want any money. Yes, I don't want anything from you. So, فقال عبد المطلب. عبد المطلب said, no. احملوا إليها الملابس والذهب. Carry for her the nice clothes and the gold. Yes. And then Amina said, this is just from Abdul Muttalib. What I'm going to give you is even more. So what do we reject? We reject the idea that Banu Hashim were poor. They were not poor. Abdul Muttalib was the chief of Quraysh. Exactly. Abdul Muttalib was in charge. How can Abdul Muttalib be poor? How can Abdul Muttalib say, you know what, I can't pay you much, or this is a yatim? This is a narrative I myself have heard when I was young and being taught, sometimes that Halima had to somehow struggle until she took the messenger of God. So it's a different story. It's a story of attachment. It's a story of connection. It's a story of divine plan and selection that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had chosen for the messenger of God to be looked after by this lady.
SubhanAllah. I can't stop smiling with this story so far. And it's nice that we're clearing up a lot of the misconceptions about the birth of the Prophet and the time around that. But one significant thing that people may not know or have heard of is, was Lady Halima a believer in a sense? Because obviously Islam has yet to be sort of established.
Yes.
There's the other Abrahamic faiths, and as we know from history, Makkah at the time was very either paganistic or idol worshipping. So there's a lot of controversy there in terms of the area. So what would you say?
Yes, it's a very interesting theological discussion, which is mixed with history, right? So some of the sisters and brothers might wonder, what is the significance of this? Whether she was a believer or not. Why do we have to believe, or do we have to discuss this notion of whether she had iman in Allah and worshipped Allah only and was not a idol worshipper, was not a polytheist? It's because, of course, we believe that the ma'soomeen, all the prophets, the Imams alayhum salam, Sayyidatul Nisa, Fatima al-Zahra al-Batul salawatullahi wa salamu alayha, all of them, their parents, their fathers and their mothers must have been monotheistic all the time and must not have worshipped any idols. Why? أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة. You were a light that was passed on by the upright loins and the pure wombs. No doubt about this. So here we ask this question. The individual who feeds Rasulullah, this milk that's given to the Messenger of God, can it be from a person who is a polytheist or not? A number of our ulama, a number of our theologians, mutakallimin, say this is not permissible. Okay. This cannot be accepted. Why? Because here we have the greatest of God's creation. We have the choicest of God's messengers and prophets. Why is it not accepted? Because notice Musa alayhi salam. Musa, the story is fascinating. Most people know it. That when Musa was picked up by Asiya, he would cry and would not accept anyone to feed him except his mother. So how can Musa gain the milk from his mother and Rasulullah not gain it from a pure source? So I have seen some of our ulama, some, very few. Do you know what they say? They say, well, you know what it is? Maybe Halima didn't feed him. Maybe she just looked after him.
Okay.
Because like you said, how can we begin to understand that she was a worshipper of Allah, because Islam had not started at that time? So it's a very common question. People say, okay, how can you prove that? Here's the thing. In the time of the Holy Prophet's birth, before that too, there was a group of people who worshipped Allah and Allah alone. They were known as the Hanafi. In terms of Hanafi means that they faced Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ad-deen al-Hanafi means the deen, the religion of Ibrahim. Yes. So Ibrahim alayhi salam, some of his descendants, they include Abd al-Muttalib, yes, Hashim, they include Abd Manaf, they include Abu Talib, they include Fatima bint Asad, yes, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayha. They include Halima as-Sa'diyya, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayha. They include Abdullah, the father of the Prophet, Amina. All these individuals never bowed down to an idol. All these individuals were pure monotheistic, muwahhideen to Allah and Allah alone.
Wow.
Because these individuals, the Holy Prophet, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Sayyidatul Nisa, Fatima, the Ahl al-Bayt, are what? Are from them. They have to be from an upright, pure source. So whether we have evidence or not is irrelevant. Yes. Our aqeedah, and please understand this, my dear sisters and brothers, on this wonderful auspicious occasion of the wilad of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, what do we have? We must believe, we must have this aqeedah, yes, that these individuals were absolute believers, monotheistic in the very sense of the word. And just a final note on Halima, salamullahi alayha. This particular individual saw so many miracles from the Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. For example, she says a story, she says, Halima said, one day I usually get the Prophet some dates from a palm tree that we have. And one day he was asleep, so I forgot to get him the dates. And the children climbed and picked up most of the dates that can be picked up.
Yeah.
He woke up from his sleep, he was hungry. So I was embarrassed. I didn't get him the dates that were fallen. So now I didn't know what to do. He came to me and said, don't worry. He went, he looked at the tree and said, oh tree, I ask you in the name of Allah, bow down. The tree bowed down and he plucked those particular dates. She saw it. She said, in my own eyes, I was able to see miracles from this man, Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And that's why Halima was a believer. She would never be given, and this plan we said by Allah, she would never be given Rasulullah except that she was a muwahhid, somebody who saw miracles from the Holy Messenger of God.
Ahsan, thank you so much, Sheikh. We are honored to have you. And it's stories like this that really enlighten us on these nights and, clearing up all these misconceptions. Thank you so much. We were honored to have you. Wiladat Mabruk to you especially.
To you and
we look forward to having you many more times. And to our viewers, inshallah, we'll be going for a short break. Join us again with our next guest after this short break. Many thanks. Ahsan.
يا رسول الله